All right, we are back. It's Friday night, October 16th. How is the weather in Tokyo today?
Uh, Kind of getting cold and cloudy. Not bad enough to complain, but yeah, definitely moving into autumn.
Yeah. But like yesterday was so warm. It felt like
Yeah,
summer, and then today much cooler. So it's that transition time, right?
it is. It is. And in New Zealand, where I'm from, the weather is the same every day. It doesn't change. It's just the temperature goes slightly up and slightly down through the year. There's no real. But in Japan, the seasons hit you like there's no slow transition. It's a jolt.
Yeah, it is. It's like suddenly you go from needing the fan to needing the heaters.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. I
Why?
wish that in between lasted a little bit longer, but it's good. I'm glad to be out of the heat.
Yeah, well, good. Well, we have lots of great topics for you guys today. Thanks for joining us. Um, to decide who's going to start, I think we should do the fair thing in Junkin. Let's go.
Junkin.
Ready?
Okay.
Saisho
So she
gu Junkin point.
that was a
Oh,
little bit
oh,
Atodashi, but
oh.
okay, I'll let you take it.
Okay. All right. I would like to start, if it's okay, with the rural move subsidy. Is that okay?
The rule move subsidy. Okay, tell me about it.
Okay, so the Japanese government is offering, now I'm sure you've heard of this, once I'll describe it.
Mm.
The
The
Japanese
rural move. Yeah. Sorry.
the rural
Gotcha.
area move, yeah. So
Yeah.
the Japanese government is offering $9,000 or a million Japanese yen to anybody who wants to keep their job in
Mm.
Tokyo, but move to a rural area to help them get going. And not in the title, but also very interesting. They're offering up to 3 million yen subsidy for any IT company that
Mm.
wants to move out to the rural area. Now, I think this is great incentive for people to keep their jobs. You don't have to risk giving up your job. You get a little bit of a perk.
Mm.
I've heard some people say it's not enough.
Yeah.
What would you say that it's just not enough?
It's enough to be a nice bonus. I don't know that anyone would like change their life plans of where to live or their job around a $9,000 bonus. But I think if you're on the edge of a decision like that, if it just moves the needle a little bit on that decision, it makes sense. Um, and yeah, plenty of jobs can, and we're learning this in the COVID situation. You don't need to necessarily be commuting to an office or within commuting distance of an office. People are learning to work effectively. And if you can work effectively from home, 10 kilometers from your office, I mean, why not 100 or 300 kilometers even? Like, why not open up those possibilities where it's possible? And yeah, I like the idea that the government's putting that there, not so much to drag people along, but but to help that decision, and maybe it'll make more people nag their companies just a little bit more, and maybe it'll make the companies, if more
Yeah.
people nag, just change the decision. So it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, in the article, it says Suga, who is now the current prime minister, in case you missed that big news, one of his top priorities is revitalizing the rural areas. He's got 100 billion yen fund for regional development. I can't even think of what 100 billion yen is in US dollars. Can
Yes, I feel like I
anybody
have to raise my pinky.
convert
Uh,
that? Yeah. But it
uh,
doesn't say what. So in my mind, I'm thinking of all these beautiful country roads that I've been
mm.
on, like that go to nowhere, that go from one small town to another. I mean, it depends how they use it, right?
I'm torn on this, by the way. I talk about this on my. Obviously, I live in Tokyo because I come from a lovely, mostly rural, small country, and I want to come to a big, exciting city. And one thing that shocked me when I came to Japan that I've mentioned on here before is the fact that Japan and New Zealand are about the same size as California. Yet, more of Japan is actually in a natural state than New Zealand is. In New Zealand, it's used for agriculture. We have lots of small towns. It's actually kind of mind blowing to me that you could have, 20 something times the population, and actually have more nature. Um, I kind of think on the one hand, cities are good in the sense that, let nature be nature, and, maybe there is an environmental upside, having lots of towns and people, maybe having broader suburbs isn't that great for the environment. But on the other hand, I think it's actually sure. Then if you've got more people in those areas, they can do more to be looking after those areas. And if you've got all these towns that are struggling with all these empty properties, from people moving away and whatever, if you could reverse that trend and you can actually help people have a much better quality of life and much more spacious areas, their kids can run around in nature and save money, and you could be saving a lot more money. I mean, the cost of living in Tokyo, you're spending half of your salary just on, you're hardly saving anything, whereas you could have that money go a lot further if you're living in rural areas. So I think less as an environmental thing, perhaps, but more as a quality of life thing. And I do think the depopulation that's happening in Japan, it's generally a bad thing. But if there is any dividend, it's the idea that people are supposed to have more space. And in Tokyo, they don't have more space.
Yeah.
It should be happening. So I can see the upsides for people. I love the idea of being able to save a lot more of my money and live in a nice place. So yeah, I'm
There's
cool with it.
yeah, there's another interesting factor which I only heard the other day in the series when I was talking to
Mm,
an artisan. He's a plasterer.
mm,
And the builder said the same thing. They were talking about how
mm,
artisans need to be surrounded by people who they can trade with and train with,
mm.
to keep up their trade. And if they're really far away from, are you
Sorry.
okay? That's
Yeah, I'm
okay.
good.
If they're really far away from where the shops that need them to make or fix something are,
Mm,
it doesn't work. So a lot of the artisans, like builders of Japanese style or plasterers, they're in the countryside. They're not
mm.
in the cities anymore because it's too expensive. So that might be one other positive benefit of moving people out to the
Oh,
rural areas, right? And increasing the population and getting rid of ghost towns, and people could have bigger
yeah.
houses because you could take a Akia over and, remodel, and it's so much cheaper. So there's a lot of knock-on effects, I think.
I mean, so many things there. The whole idea that IKEA at the moment, the empty houses, the reason that there are so many in Japan, the reason that there are ghost towns popping up all over the country is that the tax system is set up to incentivize people to just leave them empty and to not, if you knock them down and have them as empty land, you actually have to pay more tax than if you left empty house on it, which means that, people to avoid penalties are not opening up their land. So, and this is causing a whole problem with towns with only 30% of their houses filled and so on.
I didn't
And
know that. Is that true?
yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. Because I knew
So,
they were trying to find out who were the owners, and there's a
so
lot of Akia, they don't know who the owners are.
there's an IKEA bank, a
Yeah.
bank of these empty houses where you can go and find ones that are available and to sell and so on like that. But even that, I mean, the end to end, from what I understand, and there are some good YouTube channels that actually share a lot of information on this. But they point out there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of extra cost involved, which really, if you think about this as a policy issue and as an opportunity, it's weird that it's so hard to help the government solve the problem of all of these empty houses. For my end, again, coming from a place like New Zealand and growing up in Australia, the idea, what I don't like, to be honest, I don't like how even when you're in a country town, most Japanese houses have a house and they have no backyard. They just put wall fences immediately around the house. I love the idea of being able to buy a couple of cheap blocks of land and having the type of house that I would want to live on, where I could play rugby in the backyard. Um, and all that potential to redevelop. I mean, what about taking an area of empty houses and turning it into a park, or turning it into something else? All of the opportunities that we should be, which I consider a dividend of this problem, are not happening for silly reasons. And encouraging people to move to these towns is one way to address that, but there's a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Um, so
Plus,
yeah.
when Suga's talking about the infrastructure fund, they really need people from the local areas to be part of the team in finding out how to use the money. So, for example, Kamikatsu, the zero waste town in Tokushima, which I've been to a few times, fantastic. They're really going for it, trying to reduce waste. But they are dying. The town is dying because people are moving away. They do
Yeah,
not have an old folks home,
yeah,
and they do not have a high school. So
yep,
if you have a family that your kid becomes a high schooler, you're probably going to move into the city. away from that town. If you're of a certain age, you need to be in an old folks home, you're going to move away. So they need at least an infrastructure that supports their needs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other problem, I mean, the way politics are in Japan is like everywhere else. There's votes in rural towns are more valuable than votes in cities. And so there's a thing when the government collects all the taxes, cynically, I would say from me here in Tokyo, they want to go and give it to the, develop their local constituencies. But the way that they develop it in Japan is they build great roads.
Yep.
They build wonderful bridges. And again, I'm fine with them spending the money. Take my money, please. Giving everyone $9,000, dollars to go
But
do whatever. That's
let's
great.
make it
But
worth it. Yeah.
they could just think just a little bit, and they could do so much. And you could set up model towns. You could have, you could have actual solar panel towns. Self-sufficient. You could do all of these things. It's actually like a blank palette to do it. But they're so used to just throwing cash and concrete at problems. I'm a little bit frustrated as well, but I think that there are a lot of really smart people in Japan, and as you said, all the artisans. There is something within Tokyo that, there's this thing where so many people gather together, all the coolest restaurants, all the coolest businesses that are successful move towards the center, and all the people who can't afford to be near the center or start out in the outer suburbs, or if they're not very good, they'll sort of be in the outer suburbs, and you get this sort of bias from living in Tokyo to associating distance from Tokyo with not being good. And I got a really sharp reminder of this when I went to Yamaguchi for a work thing a few years ago, and I went to some remote prefectures. And everything was awesome. The restaurants were awesome. Everything was, and I was like, dude, you could come to Tokyo and be rich. And they were like young people who just built a restaurant and were just experimenting and so on. And they were like, no, why would I want to go to Tokyo? I can do everything I want here. I couldn't do that in Tokyo. And I realized, no, exactly. I mean, this is what's awesome.
I hear this come up all the time with entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs trying to do a startup. They're getting so much more support from Fukuoka than they are from Tokyo. And then they actually have startup funds for entrepreneurs and everything.
Fukuoka is a great place for startups, by the way. It's like famously good. But all these prefectures, they're so used to using really old-fashioned ways to instead of, and this is why they're losing people. So I think it's there's a good directional start to it, and I think just for lifestyle and for living in Japan, I think the potential for things to be so much like better for everybody, to have all this extra space and to be able to improve our. But it's not just a matter of throwing money.
Exactly. It needs to be thoughtfully spent, thoughtfully invested in the future. Okay, that's my topic. Your turn. Go.
So, on topic, I noticed that the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry did an interview with Nikkei, the big business paper. As is his job, the Ministry of Economy is in charge of energy. And so they were in charge primarily of Japan, helping Japan meet its Kyoto Protocol climate change goals, and in charge of electricity generation. And more so than the Environment Ministry, actually. And they have a job. On the one hand, they want to incentivize renewables, but at the same time, Japan has a lot of industry that needs a lot of electricity, and they also need to make sure, obviously, that they have the supply that they need. He did a kind of an interview with Nikkei, which contrasts really interesting with a similar interview at the same time with the UK, where he actually he pointed out that right now in 2018, Japan uses only 17% from renewables, and that 17% includes
hydro, right? Yeah.
Which doesn't really,
so without hydro, it's only like 2% or something, right? It's really low.
Sorry, hydro is only 2%?
No, without hydro. It's
Well,
the
hydro
renewables
is honestly, I mean, yes, it's non-carbon, so it's good. I mean, it's like nuclear as well. Nuclear is not, if you're thinking climate change, hydro and nuclear are great, but they're not really in the direction of renewables per se. Japan is great, has lots of rivers, and you can just dam up another one and make more electricity any time, but it still isn't really, it's very destructive at the same time, and there's other problems.
It's not the perfect long-term solution for energy.
There's no silver bullet for any of this. But look, he said that he wanted to increase from 17% to 20 to 24% by 2030.
Does this mean more dams?
It could mean more dams.
That's not a good thing.
Well, wait a minute. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. He actually said, without any numbers or any commitments, as is the case in Japan, by the way, Japan is a lot of Western countries will give flashy targets and make a big, ribbon cutting ceremony and miss it. Japan will generally be more vague, but they'll work away at it. They don't like the idea of setting something that they could be held responsible for. So the targets are modest, but they did say that it would be mostly wind and a lot of offshore wind, and that they would be looking. The ministry will be investing in looking at how they could roll out more of that technology and batteries and so on. So they're talking the right game. But you contrast that with the UK, where Boris Johnson, who I don't live in the UK and I don't really care too much about their politics, but whenever I say that name, it's funny. I see people reacting left and right. But Boris, such as he is, he said by 2030, all of the UK will be powered by wind. And it's true that north in the UK and in the North Sea, they probably have enough wind to supply the entire planet just about by the sounds of things. Although, there's a lot of challenges to wind, and there are limits. But of course, if you have batteries and storage, and you have really, really tough turbines and good maintenance systems, yeah, you could do it. And the government there is actually committing that they're just going to build as many turbines as it takes to power every home in the UK with them. And even if they don't, get 100%, it's a good goal to have. And certainly they've got the wind resource up there, and they're connected to the European grid, which means that they can soak it up. And they're talking a big game on it, so I respect that.
Having actually solar and wind, and they play off of each other. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. And I've actually met people in the UK. We have family in the UK who have solar, and it actually works, even though the image of the UK is that it rains all the time.
Yeah, not a lot of sunshine is the image.
But it's on their home, and it really cuts their energy costs because they're using what they make, most of it. I mean,
Well, it does work when
that's
it's
the
cloudy,
problem.
right? It doesn't need to be cloudless.
No, you
yeah.
can, yeah, and there are a fair number of sunny days, even in winter. It's just cold. That's a funny story. When I was in elementary school, we went from Hawaii to Scotland for a year. My dad did an exchange, and as a minister. And I had only ever seen people wear lots of coats and jackets on TV. I'd never experienced it myself.
Yeah.
And so when I went there was the first time I saw snow and everything. And I realized even when it's sunny, it can be cold.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
That was a big surprise to me.
Right. Well, I guess, yeah, you're a very, it's good to have an upbringing where you're surprised to find that out. But yeah.
But now I'm in Japan and we have seasons. So I can appreciate that again.
Yeah, winter is the sunniest time of year. And here in Tokyo, we're sheltered by mountains on all sides. So it's basically, we have the best winters. The reason they moved the capital to Tokyo is because our winters here are just basically 3 months of sunshine.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have great winters here. It's really only February that I hate. That's miserable.
Yeah. When it's just starting to change and you get the damp air comes up. Yeah. West Japan gets pretty harsh though. You get the Sea of Japan and the weather off there as well. I remember being really shocked going down to Fukuoka and it being much colder down there than it was in Tokyo. Really? We're just lucky because we're just sheltered by mountains on all sides, so it all burns out before it gets to us.
Yeah. The weather difference. Did you want to talk more about that topic or?
Well, actually, there's more to come on my second topic, so I'll hold over. But what is cool is that, as always, Japan is always disappointingly modest with its ambitions. Oh, the other thing about that article, which is behind a paywall, but what I found upsetting a little bit, but it did show the mix. And, Japan used to have 20% of the mix came from nuclear, and they were invested in that being part of it, again, as a decarbonization goal. And when that disappeared after Fukushima, it's all been replaced by fossil fuels, all of it, and the renewables is sort of slowly growing, but there's a lot of challenges. That said, the government is doing a lot of, on a low-key basis, they take their time about it. They're not saying all wind by 2030, but they're doing a lot of other interesting things though, which I'm hoping will pay dividends, and I'm hoping Japan will build a big, solid, reliable move to it, which I'll talk about a little bit later with hydrogen and stuff like that. But yeah, they're thinking about it, but they're not thinking very big about it.
It is positive. Any change in the right direction is positive change.
Indeed.
What we like to see.
Baby steps.
I'd like to talk about the Olympics next. So I have kind of they're kind of connected. There was an interesting article about Sebastian Coe was saying that Olympic athletes should be allowed to protest. So this has been a very pivotal year in terms of protests. Naomi Osaka wearing the masks.
Mm.
with the names of people killed by the police.
Mm.
And the Olympics has always been a protest-free zone. But actually, there
Mm.
have been protests
Yeah.
that wasn't just picked up on or wasn't
Well,
that forefront in the media, right? Like,
there are some famous ones. The
yeah,
two that stand out to me
standing
are,
up on the podium with
yep.
the fist raised, right?
And
Those,
apart from that, and they got penalized and sent home. You know that there was the bronze medal winner in that photo is a white guy from Australia, and he knew about it, and all he just hung his head. He didn't raise his fist anything with them, but he said he was with them and whatever, and he stood on the thing, and he was basically banned for life back in Australia just for like going along with the two
is
people
that
protesting
right?
beside him. That's how bad it was. The other one was a few years ago, as someone who grew up in who's half Australian, Kathy Freeman, when she won the 200 meters, I think in the '88 Olympics, and she got out the Aboriginal flag and walked around with it, and she was sanctioned by the Australian Olympic team for flying a flag that wasn't the official national flag, and frankly, that was a really old white guy who was offended at an Aboriginal asserting her identity. Um, so it comes up, and when you ask me, those things that should be celebrated, and unfortunately, it becomes an excuse to do the opposite sometimes.
Right. Yeah. I
But yeah,
mean, that's the risk, right?
right.
If you open the rule, you're going to get some supporters of somebody that you might not want to
Oh,
see.
well, that could be the yes.
And we would all be offended.
Mm.
And then kind of connect, but I understand his point because
Mm.
2020 has been a very pivotal year in terms of speaking out and allowing companies and businesses and sports industries allowing the
Mm.
players to speak out. And it's kind of shifted in terms of the rules
Yeah,
this year. So I can see where he's coming from. It's an
yeah.
interesting argument.
Again, as a New Zealander, one of the most shameful things we've ever, as a New Zealander, involved the Olympics. It was when New Zealand loves rugby, and one of our best rival countries has always been South Africa, and we have a long history of playing them, and it's always complicated because we have such good rugby relations with South Africa, it's really obvious to us. It's always been historically obvious to us. We have lots of Maori and Pacific Island players in our teams, and whenever we sent them to play against South Africa, they would say we weren't allowed to take any non-white players, except we were allowed one Maori player who could be an honorary white for the tour. And we went along with those requests because, we wanted to play them so badly. We would, so we would actually adopt apartheid for playing games with them. And there were things like stories of South African teams touring New Zealand and being outraged that that New Zealand fans were cheering for Maori players over white South African players and stuff like that. And all of this sort of outrageousness. In the 1976, when we played a couple of test matches against them, all the African nations boycotted the Olympics in 1976 because of New Zealand playing South Africa at rugby. And it actually forced New Zealand to wake up, and it forced us, years later, it nearly caused a civil conflict in New Zealand over this as well. It became to a point where after 60 years, we finally realized, actually some things are more important than sport. Looking the other way at apartheid, for the sake of a good rugby game, we have to draw the line. And I have South African friends who told me that when you live in that bubble in South Africa during that time, they didn't see the protests and stuff against them, but they noticed when the New Zealand rugby team stopped coming after 1982. And it played a part in them ending apartheid, but it was taken out. This was like 30, 40 countries boycotted the Olympics over it, and good on them, and shame on New Zealand for triggering it.
Well,
So
it's good that
absolutely.
it's like something of a conversation now because
Yeah,
it's still relevant, right? Diversity
absolutely.
inclusion issues are still very relevant, if
Yeah.
not more so, right?
Yeah. And now it's become professionalized as well. This idea that it used to be they wanted to keep it pure, the idea being no money either. Well, how commercial has it become? So it can be
Yeah.
commercial, but you can't actually talk about social issues. I mean, that's
Yeah.
messed up as well. So yeah, no, good, good, good.
And then
Absolutely.
the other Olympic article I wanted to touch on just
Mm.
briefly is the fact that the NBA, the
Mm.
Basketball Association, has now said we're not sending anybody. And I predict that we're going to see a lot more of this, especially from American sports companies,
Mm.
that they're going to say we're not sending any players to the Olympics. It's not safe enough for them to travel, or
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I good.
I think we can expect more of that.
Croatia's probably going to get the gold then, and good for them. And plus, the pro teams, they don't want their players to get injured either. I'm a little bit cynical about that, but yeah,
I
I guess
think they
that's a
should
shame
have
for
an
the spectacle,
online
but
Olympics. I said this on Japan River Cruise. Have everybody in their home
esports.
venues and home team advantage and all online. And then
Yeah.
you only have to worry about Photoshop, not doping.
Yeah, I mean, it's toughest for the athletes. I get it. The athletes spend their whole lives building up to this, and
Yeah.
taking it away is a big deal. I feel most sorry for them. I don't feel sorry for the sponsors, and and for the, as much as I would love to see the Olympics, there's more important things right now, and when we can do it, that will be great. I feel bad for the athletes, but it still seems ridiculous that they're planning to go ahead next year. The idea that the entire world is going to be ready for this next year, even if some places are ready, and that's doubtful. To me, we
It
should just call it.
it really depends what happens this autumn with the disease, but everybody's
We could already see. Yeah,
everybody's expecting it to be worse than ever.
yeah.
Okay, your topic next.
My topic next. The Japanese government is doing deals with Brunei and Australia to get hydrogen. And hydrogen to me is just super interesting, partly from my tech and futurism perspective. A little bit. It's funny, I read this, I thought, great, hydrogen. So hydrogen is cool because, of course, you can use it in internal combustion type systems, except you'll have nothing but steam come out. So it's like eco-friendly. It's also the most abundant element in the universe. And you can power, the thing is as well, is that you can not only power fuel cells, like batteries, as well as combustion engines. So you could do everything from your watch to a car to actually you could fly a rocket. It's high density energy as well. It's hard to find on Earth, but it's everywhere in space. So this is also like if we're living in space stations and on the moon and Mars one day, we should actually be developing hydrogen-based fuel systems for that, just from out of practicality, let alone the fact it helps us with all of our problems here on Earth. So although hydrogen is a long way from being available on every street corner, and we have great battery technology and electric technology, I still think we should be using all of the options, right? I think long term, this is a really cool thing. So I was super excited to see, Japan's done a massive deal to get all of this hydrogen imported from Brunei and Australia, and they're trying all these new techniques. What are the techniques? That's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Australia's figured out how to extract hydrogen from coal. Well, congratulations, Australia. They've got to figure out something to do from coal. And apparently the process of extracting the hydrogen from coal generates a lot of carbon as a byproduct,
Well,
which you can
I don't think it's
capture and sequester.
extracting hydrogen from coal. I think it's using coal as an
Mm.
energy to make hydrogen process. That's always the problem with hydrogen,
Well,
is that the process of making hydrogen is
no, it requires
energy, really energy hungry.
yeah, actually, you're right. They have to apply energy to it as well. The Australian so the two experimental processes. The one in Australia is based on extracting hydrogen because hydrogen doesn't like it's at the Earth's core apparently, but it doesn't lie around everywhere except obviously as water and things like that. But in Australia, the idea is that they think they can actually extract hydrogen from. They can separate it from ignite, which is like something you find. It's like really cheap. It's not usable coal, but it's usable. It's like a byproduct of coal mining. It's coal that's too dirty to use, but you can get hydrogen out of it. So the Australians have figured out with all that coal that they've got lying around that they dig up that you can extract it, but when you separate it, you're left with carbon, and so that doesn't seem as good as it first sounded. I thought, well, what about Brunei? And Brunei is extracting hydrogen.
So that way, just to get it in my head, that's a very energy hungry process in Australia, and then they have to ship
Using
it
coal.
to Japan.
Yes.
So, I mean, the whole idea about hydrogen in Japan for the Olympic Games and everything, oh, great, it's all going to be made in Fukushima by solar panels and,
Well, so that is the third part. That's the slightly happy ending after the two slightly like kind of parts before it. But you're right. First of all, in Australia, they found a way to do it, but it's getting it out of coal, which they have to dig up, and it leaves lots of carbon as a byproduct that they have to sequester. Not good. And then you've got Brunei, where they figured out how to extract it from LNG, which again, Brunei is a huge oil-rich country, and again, I kind of get it. Like at least you're getting something good out of it, but again, it's a dirty process. You get a lot of this clean energy out of it, and it's probably better than just burning the LNG. But again, you still have processing, you still have energy to do it. And then finally, at the very end, well, Japan said it's investing in all these technologies to figure out ways on Earth to get hydrogen and to ship lots of the stuff in. All around Japan, there are lots of companies actually doing lots of research on doing this in different ways. And the most promising one in Japan is, as you just said, in Fukushima. using solar power as an energy source for actually extracting it from the ocean, which is like, to me, okay, why don't they just do that everywhere? And I get it, you don't get the volumes, but apparently from one day of doing this in Fukushima, they actually pull enough hydrogen to power for 520 homes for a day. So, the scales are hard, and I get it. There may be sexier ways to do it right now, but I still think that it's good to me that at least the Japanese government is going crazy investing in ways to do it, because again, if you can get a ton of hydrogen, it is just a really, it doesn't require, you can use it in ships, you can use it in airplanes, you can use it in batteries.
My problem with hydrogen, I mean, there's so many problems we already touched on, but another major problem is storage. That it's
Mm.
really hard
You need high pressure tanks.
to find hydrogen storage places. So their idea for Tokyo Olympics was to have hydrogen fueling stations around Tokyo so that you could have hydrogen powered buses and and that's great because it's zero emissions, but they've only made one in Tokyo.
So
they
that's
just
right.
can't keep up with it's really
So it's not ready. It's not even close to
expensive
ready.
and it's not there yet. It's
Nowhere
maybe
close to there.
all the estimates I've read is like maybe in 50 years or
50.
20 years, like the technology is just not really there, accessible yet,
I'm seeing more optimistic timelines on that, but yeah, and again, a good thing is you could essentially convert over existing petroleum infrastructure, petrol stations. You can modify the tanks, and you can do things like that. And you can cart it around. You're right, the storage is more difficult. It's a dangerous thing to handle, but again, and it's not that I think it's one over the other. It's just one of a lot of solutions. But again, in Japan, they're doing a lot of investment in this, and for things like replacing, dirty jets, which are incredibly polluting, which you're never going to solve with batteries. For things like, long haul ships. Although another story that I have is that Kawasaki's, investing in battery powered tankers.
really
But to
exciting.
pull
And
oil,
you know what they want to deliver?
yes, oil. I know.
Crude oil.
I mean, a ship is a ship. Why
But
why they
at
combined it
least the
with oil?
ship
Baby
is
steps.
electric, but
Baby steps. But what I love most about that, yes, the fact that they're building this fleet of electric ships to deliver oil is somewhat painful. But the idea, they also said that in natural disasters, you could actually go and park these off the coast and use them as batteries, like they're
yes,
talking
I
about doing
like
with
that
cars.
idea. Yeah.
I like that. And like I said, they could have announced that they were using them for any purpose other than that, and it would have been a perfect story.
Yes.
Like, why do they always do this? It's like the same with the hydrogen story just now. It's just not quite. It's like they have to balance out the good news with the bad news. But again, it's all still progress in a generally better
I mean,
direction.
they need someone on the team in the room making policy
A PR person.
who actually thinks about, okay, but that's a good idea, and what would be the next step? Or somebody who knows how to do sustainability analysis
If I was working at
and
Kawasaki Heavy,
branding,
yeah. If I was working at Kawasaki Heavy, I would suggest that they sell the first ship to like a vegan food producer. So do the oil ship ones after. At
Yeah.
least try to pretend a little bit. Have a little bit of idealism about it. But look, it is still good that they're looking at things like, and it's a bigger deal as well. The other thing that I loved about this idea as a technology, and it's the same as with cars. The ships are cheaper to run. They're lower maintenance. You don't need a whole bunch of crew on them. They can actually.
The crew thing is really interesting, and that seems to be the push why they're going for it now
Yeah,
because of the labor shortage and the COVID. They just can't get the crew,
yeah.
so that's kind of pushing them towards this new technology, which is very cool.
Which is actually it's almost like it's in spite of the eco-friendliness that they're doing this. That's the thing. I mean, the fact they're shipping oil with it, but
Well,
I
it
guess
doesn't
what I'm saying
have
is
to
that
be oil. I
you know,
mean, we get so many of our goods by ships,
yeah,
right? Still, everywhere
it
in
could
the
be
world.
anything.
So,
It could be
yeah,
literally a billion things other than
if
oil
they're
that they could have.
shipping, maybe Costco can give them some advice and ship over their Costco stuff, and then create some kind of better supply chain. That'd be awesome.
Yes.
Okay, well, that was interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Your turn.
The next. Are we ready for the next?
I am.
It's it's really sad. But suicides have been increasing this year in Japan. And I think all over the world, of course, a lot of people are more depressed because of isolation. But it's really sad that the rates have really gone up. Overall, 15.4% higher in August than previous years,
Mm,
but 40% higher for women
mm,
and 50% higher for children.
mm.
So age from elementary school to high school.
Yeah.
And they in the article they think it's because the kids are feeling the stress of the teachers, the kids are feeling the stress of the parents, and the
Mm,
kids are feeling pressure to keep up. And
mm,
I can definitely understand this as a parent in Japan,
mm,
that there is a lot of pressure, like kids going to juku, kids trying to keep up with tests and stuff. And then because they had some time off, even
mm.
though now they're back at school, I think I can understand how kids might feel that
Mm.
kind of stress and extra pressure, but it's so sad. It's horrible to
Yeah.
hear that such young kids are talking about wanting to disappear or wanting to die, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, no, I mean,
So, how can we improve this? I mean, when I was reading that, I was like, what kind of services can we do? And then, of course, for the women's rates going up, one of
mm,
the reasons they attribute is because a lot more women than men are in temporary contracts.
mm,
And 60% more, 66% of
mm.
all job losses this year have been women.
Yeah.
So they're taking a much heavier blow
Yeah.
of this COVID job loss situation than men are.
Yeah.
And they're also the ones taking care of the children. So if they're more stressed, then the children are more stressed. I mean, it's kind of
Mm.
a horrible knock on effect, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, first up, of course, Japan has, I think, for adults, one of the highest rates in the world, and high rates for children. Um, in most countries, and also in Japan, generally, the rates are terrible, and they are overwhelmingly, of course, even now, still. You, there's something I think should be looked at in some way generally as a men's health problem. There is a thing that men are more likely to do it, obviously, but as you say, the additional pressures and the way it's disproportionately affected women and children means that those rates, which have been from lower baselines, but yes, they're coming more into the same sort of realms as the as men. That and I have no idea about the right ways to do it. Coming from New Zealand, there is a thing coming to Japan. Japan, second highest youth suicide rate in the world. New Zealand is the only country with a higher one. And it's kind of funny because growing up as a kid is so different in New Zealand to Japan, and yet they've both got the same problem.
Oh, no.
Um, and I
I
don't know
didn't
if,
know that.
yeah, and it's funny because and obviously if we knew the answer, hopefully it wouldn't happen so much. But uh, on the one hand, you could say, yeah, pressure of juku, pressure of exams. Well, that's different in New Zealand. We're falling out of trees and eating dirt over there. But what is in common that I see between Japan and New Zealand that may or may not is the peer pressure, the social pressure, the social conformity pressure, which kids feel, I think, a lot more intensely than adults. It's part of becoming an adult is learning to deal with that, but you're less equipped to do that. And it's true that, Japanese kids, the pressure to fit in is pretty high. And if you don't feel like you're fitting in, that's a thing. And I think when you put isolation in a mix with that, you're right. I always automatically assumed, oh, in Japan, it must be all the stress because you make the kids work so hard. But yeah, no question. The situation right now is, and as you said as well, like while women have suddenly are more employed now in Japan than they used to be, they've taken the jobs that are the most vulnerable and the first ones to be adjusted for this as well. They're the first ones to be restructured. So
It's
yeah,
really in the article they also bring up a very good point that the government is thinking about adding funds to different social services, which is great.
mm,
But then the article says, but it's really important that you not only give money, but you need to find a way to create a
mm,
bigger acceptance of mental health issues in Japan. and
Oh
that
yeah.
they exist, and that it's okay to
Mm,
be feeling like this, and to have accessibility to talking about it, like counseling. A lot of kids will go to the
mm,
school nurse to try,
yeah.
and they're kind of like an unofficial counselor, and I'm so
Mm,
glad they have that. But some school nurses, they're not trained as counselors, or they wouldn't know what warning
mm,
signs to look out for or something, right? So a bit more training would be great.
NHK did a big feature on that actually. I remember now a few nights ago that yeah, there was a big push on this to develop the number of counselors in Japan and have them available on phone lines in every prefecture. And this is a problem. Some of the prefectures, there are so few qualified counselors now that people who have called them up have not been able to get through. And so the government's been scrambling to make it so that if you're in a prefecture with very few people, you're not stuck in that prefecture, and that there are national toll-free numbers and stuff like that. But they were highlighting the issue that apparently there was a big push to set all of these up, where every prefecture got these sort of volunteers about 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And to become certified to be a person on those lines, you have to go through something like 1 to 3 years training for it. And most of the people who got certified, all got certified when it was set up 30 years ago. So they're retiring. Some of them in situations where, again, the call centers themselves were in office locations which people didn't want to go to. But the thing is, now that they're realizing that they've got this shortage of people and this problem, it's not simply, as you say, a matter of throwing numbers. One, you've got to train people, and you've got to have people that want to be trained to do this job. And that's the other thing about welfare jobs, and a big problem for Japan. Apart from the fact that people who are in jobs that involve looking after other people are always desperately underpaid. It's not economically valued as it should be. Um, on top of that, even if the pay was better, it's not the sort of job that you do for money. There's certain types of people that do it. And when you have a declining population, where do you get them from? So exactly as you say, any solution for this has to be almost fundamentally like trying to develop a population of people that want to be caregivers.
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
And have a dialogue with parents and kids themselves, and
Yeah.
try to find out what the needs actually are, instead of just getting experts to judge it from the outside, right?
Yeah.
I know in our area you have the walking route. A lot of the elderly people, they'll go on the streets and wear the jackets
Oh,
and
yeah.
talk to the kids, and the kids all are really friendly with them. And
Mm,
I think that's a fantastic thing about Japanese culture, but they're
mm,
all volunteers.
mm.
Maybe if their bento was at least covered every time they did it. I mean, some
Yeah.
kind of support for people who are part of the support network. That would be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't have any great ideas. I actually, my analysis of it is that it's the best and worst thing about both countries, Japan and New Zealand. The best and worst thing about both countries is that people are so nice. But the way that people are so nice is that they're considerate. They're aware of the people around them, rather than being extroverted. Hey, look at me to everybody. They're Japanese are painfully attentive to the people around them, and but it's the result, which means that they are nice and considerate. And it's the same when you go to New Zealand. People will always be really nice, but it's the result of living in a place where you're really watched and where you're really aware of the eyes on you all the time growing up. And that's a kind of a culture which has some positive outcomes, but it has a lot of really negative things for people who struggle to fit in. There isn't a broad acceptance of weird people. I think that's a big part of it. And
I
that's a
think
problem in New Zealand as well.
I mean, it didn't have any information about urban areas versus rural areas.
Yeah.
But I know in our neighborhood, we have a pretty nice community in feeling in the neighborhood, and
Mm,
everybody kind of talks to each other. We have the board that you pass around for information. We have a little festival that we're going to do in 2 weeks' time or a week time, and the autumn festival, and all the kids get together and play together. So even though the kids aren't friends, they still
mm,
know each other and maybe give them a nod or something. And
yeah.
I didn't have that growing up in Hawaii. I
Yeah.
didn't have, and nobody knew their neighbors. And trick or treating was always, people are kind of worried, because you're going house to house and stuff.
Well, that's it. It's the nicest thing about Japan. But at the same time, a lot of those kids who grow up in those towns, they can't get out of them in a way to Tokyo fast enough when they're old enough.
Right.
So yeah, it's the nicest, and I don't. But these things are so complex, and I don't
Yeah.
pretend to understand them. It's just an element. I wish
Yeah.
I knew what you could do about it or what the causes are.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
think talking about it and talking about the problem in Japan and that it does exist, and if
Mm,
you are living in Japan, try to talk to your kids, or at least keep
mm,
an ear open when you talk to your kids. Be kind to other people, especially other women who might
mm,
be working menial jobs. They might be under a lot of stress right now,
mm.
and let's think of ideas how we could possibly help. Right?
Yeah. For kids, I really think my take is that it really is to do with diversity, and diversity can be interpreted so many ways. In Japan, it's defined really narrowly, generally as male-female diversity, but it's really not that. And I noticed this when moving between Australia and New Zealand a lot, that diversity as a contrast to conformity. This idea that you can have a class of people who are all Japanese and all, male, female, or whatever, but you can still have people who are just wired differently and they act differently. And the idea of being accepting of someone who are a bit strange and not forcing them to behave ways that they're not inclined. I mean, that must be so. The fact that Japan, until like 20 years ago, and it still happens sometimes out there, left-handed kids used to be fixed, by their parents in the school. And I've known people who grew up in that generation, and they talk about how stressful it was to be left-handed. People who have things like learning disabilities, and how they sort of get laid by the wayside and whatever, and relegated schools. There's no system to look after them. There's this overall cultural thing that you have to fit. Kids must feel that so hard, and and feel that there's no place for them, which is terrible. To me, you go to a place like Australia after New Zealand and you realize, wow, it's okay to be weird here. There are lots of weird people, but I also realize I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to let people be a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think
And
people feel real
and I
pressure
think
about that here.
this is why a lot of young people are moving to the cities,
Mm,
and they can be weird or different, or uh,
yeah,
identify themselves different than your family or friends back home saw you.
yeah,
And I think that's true around the world, not just Japan, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Should we go to your next topic?
Yes. uh,
We're doing good today.
we
We're
are.
keeping
We're
up.
on time. We're doing good topics.
Yeah, nice.
I'm feeling good about this. I feel like I'm self-conscious that I may be appearing to be some sort of hydrogen lobbyist lately. It's not that. It's just I think it's just a cool future technology that I just think would be cool if it was available. So yeah, I had battery ships, and I do like the idea, apart from the fact that they carry oil. I do like the idea of having them rock up and plug into towns that are disconnected after typhoons and
No,
so on.
that was a great idea.
Look, another one I like.
Thanks for joining Tokyo Sam. Thanks for your comment.
Oh,
Giving
Tokyo Sam.
you
Hey.
comments about your chiseled good looks.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you. Very observant there. I appreciate that. Yeah, no,
The the EV boats, the tankers. Are
well,
we?
we kind of touched on that, and I
We
guess that was
did,
all that
right?
there was
Yeah.
to it. So I could go into Toyota fuel. So Toyota and Hino, two big truck makers. And again, you talk about a big part of the car equation. While I am excited, maybe not as excited, you actually bought a Tesla, but
Yeah.
I am pretty excited
Pretty
about
excited.
electric cars. But trucks are much more significant when you think about emissions and you think about and for all sorts of things. Like when I think how I want to be driving around 10 years from now, getting those trucks off the road, or having them drive in the middle of the night, or, remote controlled, and have the roads open up during the day, for some, it saves money for the freight companies, and it makes it better for the other people who are in cars. So this
Are they
idea that,
talking about self-driving trucks?
well, everything. So
Uh-huh.
it starts with that Toyota and Hino are looking at having fuel cell trucks, like mass produced and being sold in California and Japan by 2024. Like they're going for that.
It sounds like the market is North America first.
Yeah.
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 That's
I
the
mean,
biggest market,
they're
right?
developing the technology here, but of course it makes sense in the US. And again, batteries, there are battery trucks being developed, and that's a good thing as well. But of course, you've still got for freight, you want to be able to do quick recharging and you want long distances. And this is where fuel cells make. And fuel cells are a super interesting technology. I mean, again, back before we thought lithium ion could be used for cars properly, back when I was doing renewables, everyone assumed fuel cells were going to be the answer, because you can actually pour without burning it, you can actually pour petrol into fuel cells, and use that as a source. You can actually use a lot of
Really?
existing energy sources.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah,
know
you
that.
can actually convert gasoline into fuel cell, fuel. So it's an easy transition.
Without
The other,
emissions? With the zero emissions?
yeah, because you're not burning it. You're basically running it through through a fuel cell, which like extract whatever the process is. But you're actually using a cell in a battery. and you can get away with it in the emissions, like the electrolysis process or whatever they use to extract the electricity from it. Um, yeah, it was one thing that you can convert fossil sort of fuels, like liquid fossil fuels, into pretty efficient fuel cell fuels. But of course, you can also use water and other things as well, as again, if you can electrolyze them in the cells. So when I was doing this, which was like 14 years ago, um, everyone was most excited and talking about as the battery. The Teslas would get Ballard used to be the Tesla. That used to be the company that was going to produce fuel cells that you could put into any car. It's a Canadian
Ballard.
company.
Uh-huh.
Ballard.
No, never heard of them.
So that's how they went. But that was the most promising, and it still is there. And it's still, while now lithium-ion batteries make sense in cars, and actually in trucks and some other things as well. Fuel cells still make sense in a lot of other applications. And Japan has, again, quietly been plodding away. The engineers in Japan and places like Toyota, they're plodding away, and it's frustrating how long it takes. But the fact that they're saying 2024, and if Toyota's saying that, you can hold them to that they're going to actually be mass producing fuel cell trucks. And if we get the same kind of benefits in terms of like maintenance and environmental friendliness from them.
I mean, they've actually had hydrogen fuel cell cars in California.
Yeah.
I know Arnold Schwarzenegger had one. So certain government agencies were leasing them. So it's not a brand new technology for the States.
It's one of the older ones.
I've never seen a hydrogen car in Japan. Have you?
Yeah, the Toyota FCV, they have them at every car show, and they have demonstration cars sometimes going around places like Tokyo. The problem being, as you pointed out, there's like only one hydrogen fuel station in Tokyo where you can actually refill your fuel cell car.
What I've heard too is it's very expensive, but it's very quick to. Is it quick? I can't remember.
It's the same as filling up your car with gas.
But it lasts you can go so far, like so much farther than even the best Tesla at the moment, right?
It is, well, and not only that, but you don't have to wait now to recharge. You can fill the same time as you'd fill your car, and you can go longer, and it's zero emissions. It's purely an infrastructure, and it's not a technology problem. It's purely an infrastructure problem. But that's a big problem, right?
And there is some debate about whether a bad accident in a hydrogen fuel cell car would be a lot worse than a regular car, right? There is that concern still. How you can insulate the tank so that on collision it wouldn't explode.
Lithium-ion batteries have a bad reputation too, but they've been working on the technology a long time to make it safe. And yes, you need a very different tank safety standards that you would have, on these sort of things. But again, if your goal is to have, as I hope for, self-driving, low maintenance, zero emission, cheap to run, cars that not only help with climate change but make all of our lives better, to me it's something that, again, I'm not looking for a winner takes all. I think it'd be great if there are lots of fuel cell trucks and Tesla cars and hydrogen airplanes or whatever. You've got that's a great world.
Zero emissions. It is definitely the right direction. Kevin Meyerson says GM hydrogen fuel cells mark 50 years of development. 2000 in 2016 it was 50 years. Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, and I guess because if you looked at this 20 years ago, it was the most promising and most developed technology. I think that's why the Japanese car makers similarly went in, and they're going on old school car manufacture development cycles that's taking so long. But keep doing it. I mean, like I said, 2024 is close enough to be mildly excited, and I don't think that's vaporware.
No, that's really close. That's only basically 3 years away.
Yeah.
I'd be amazed. Well, that's another thing that turns people off. The cost of buying one is crazy, right? At the moment. But the more they advance the technology, prices should come down. But not being able to charge anywhere or fill up,
it's a non-starter without that.
That's a huge problem. Yeah.
No.
Pretty excited about Formula One changing to the EVs. I'm not like a huge Formula One fan, but because they're changing to EV technology or zero emission technology for race cars, I'm really interested in this. And I think I told you last time, I visited the Ginza Nissan shop and I saw their E1, is it called the E1 circuit?
Formula E.
And I saw their racer and it's It's just so
Well,
cool.
it's already, so that's it. You're right there. So there's been Formula E now for a couple of years, and even people, motorheads, for many of them, it is still understandably sacrilege. The idea of, because the engines and the combustion technology is a big part of the love of the sport for the real purists. And the idea of having electric radio control car type cars suddenly replace you, I get that. But it's funny because I've read a lot of reviews by motorhead people who appreciate what they love about Formula E as opposed to Formula One. And Formula One, the technology on cars is now, everything is pretty much at the limit of what it can be, and the drivers are at the limit of what they can be. And apparently, like, I used to watch Formula One as a kid when you used to have Alan Prost and Ayrton Senna and all those famous names, and it was like tennis at the same time. It used to be so much more exciting somehow, and the cars would change all the time, and you'd have these real movie style races. Whereas lately, Formula One has kind of become, the positions never change the whole race. It's so hard to pass. Formula E, what's cool about it, and it's what's cool about electric motors, is that you can sort of program the motors to like have special boosts and whatever, and apparently they set Formula E up like video games where you can actually literally have people run over like virtual markers which will give them a 30-second super boost. And they've got
Wow.
a boost which they can use at some time in the race which they can decide to use strategically,
I
but they've got to
believe
consider their
it
tires.
because since
Makes
I've
it
been
exciting.
driving a Tesla, you realize how powerful it is. This is
Yeah.
not a golf cart that you would imagine like a usual electric
You
car.
could use it for golf,
You
but yes.
can really zoom right
Yeah.
past people or, zoom in and out. So if it's a race car, I
Yeah.
know I'll never have a chance, but I would love to drive one.
Well, for me, well, apparently, just as a fan of motor racing, the fans of motor racing who are into Formula E and why it's drawing a lot of attention is simply because the nature of the electric motors and the way that you can stack these things up like it, where you can have strategic times of extra boost power, and you can have ludicrous mode for a lap. It actually means that the whole race is not going to be everyone in the same. It's not going to be like watching a train going at high speed around a lap. You're actually going to have lots of jostling and lots of. So it actually means as a spectator thing. Well, some people can't get over the lack of noise or the
Well,
weird
that's
electric noises.
I had
Um,
a really interesting conversation with a guy who just spent an enormous amount on a regular gas car,
yeah,
and it's a muscle car. And I
yeah,
said, you got less than 5 years on that, is what I've heard, And he's
yeah,
like, but I didn't want an electric car because I would miss the noise. I love
yeah.
the noise, right?
Yeah, times have changed. I get it. I get the people who want that and who love that. They want the V8 sound and so on. Jeremy Clarkson, who's like famous auto journalist, talks about that as well. But yeah, it's a better It's a better spectacle. It's more exciting to watch.
They could
Um,
add speakers with the noise.
well, one of my favorite, like one of to me the coolest looking car in the world. That I've been tempted when I go to America to try renting just while I go over there for work or something. I almost did it last time I went there. Is the BMW i8. It looks like it's from a science fiction. I don't know if you know the car, but it looks
Is
like it's
it
from
is
a.
that the electric one?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. And it looks like it could fly. It looks like it's from a sci-fi movie. But what they did with it was they have a non-adjustable. They actually have a fake like motor engine noise that emits. And you do need it. One problem with electric cars is for hard of
That's
hearing
funny.
people, for disabled people, it's actually a problem when they can't hear the cars. And I remember reading the debates about having artificial noise deliberately to alert people.
I
But
heard
the idea
that when they were
that you
first
buy,
developing, like they wanted to add a bell or
yeah, something but look, for me, if I want to buy
something.
a car that looks like it's from 50 years in the future, I'm perfectly okay with it sounding like it runs on electricity and not a 1950s V8, uh, I
Yeah.
can't understand them. I
My
guess
my
BMW
late
are better to do that.
80-year-old neighbor, she says, "I love how your car sounds like the future."
Yeah,
And she says,
that's what I want.
"I love when you go wee wee." She
Yeah,
imitates the noise. But then in the Tesla talk, he was
mhm.
saying his neighbors complain about the electronic noise when he's backing up.
Yeah.
So some people don't like it, right?
Well, you're
You can
never going to please
definitely hear
everybody.
it. Yeah. About fossil fuels, no, zero emissions. Kevin says another aspect of FCV is that
Mm,
hydrogen is a plug in replacement for fossil fuels
mm.
in terms of distribution requirements.
Right.
So
You
it
can convert the existing
allows
infrastructure easily.
for a continuation of existing post requirement jobs for bureaucrats.
That probably is a part of it. I mean, it is an easy conversion for fossil fuel infrastructure. And look, if that contributes to solving climate change, I don't. This is my point is I don't think we should be all invested in one solution for everything. The more options we have and the more solutions we have, all the better. But
And they might
yeah,
have a breakthrough with hydrogen, and then it's super long range. It's a game changer if they can work it out.
well, the futurist in me, like the fact that they figured out that there's so much ice on the moon that they could set up, and you got permanent sunshine just about in some places there and so on. You could set up permanent solar powered hydrogen plants on the moon, and you could go all over, in space. There's hydrogen all over the place. So once we're living in space, you could actually create all the hydrogen you want. It's all over the place up there. So this is the other reason I think it's a good idea to work on the technology here and now, is that long term, it's absolutely apart from the fact it's clean and it helps us with our current problems, it's everywhere once we have factories and so on in space, which is, and have
Wow.
power stations in
You
space,
are
which I hope will happen in my life.
thinking far ahead.
I don't think it's that far ahead. I'm an optimist, obviously, but I'm a techno optimist. I think
Well,
we can solve these problems by being more technological
but
if we
no,
focus
I
the right
I
way.
agree with you. The more different kinds of technology being worked on, which is more sustainable, as long as it is more sustainable and not made by fossil fuels, I am all for it. So
Yeah,
that is our hour. Thank you so much,
yeah,
Hikosaemon. That was fun.
always a pleasure.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you everybody for joining us. We looks like we had most people from YouTube. Thank you, YouTubers. Lots of fun. Have a
Coolest
great
people on
weekend.
YouTube.
And I'm back next week for a full week, including Kevin Myerson is going to tell us about his EV. He got a Jaguar.
Oh, you got an EV Jaguar. That's cool.
Yes. So I'm really
Oh,
excited to talk to you, Kevin.
cool.
Yeah. Everybody have a great weekend. Take care of yourself. Be nice to everybody. Bye.
Bye.